imagine facing 20 months in a foreign prison simply for retweeting a picture of an umbrella.
Right.
I mean, not organizing a protest, not writing a manifesto, literally just tapping a button on a cartoon.
It is wild to even think about.
And now imagine your legal defense isn't an alibi or, a character witness, but Kurt Gödel's 1931 incompleteness theorems.
Which is just, well, it sounds completely made up.
It really does.
Yeah.
Today, we are looking at a case that completely shatters our expectation of how the justice system operates. And more importantly, how human beings define truth.
Yeah, it sounds like a premise from a sci-fi novel, but it is entirely real. We are looking at a scenario where the foundational laws of mathematics and complex systems physics were dragged into a courtroom to fight a criminal charge.
Oh, wow.
It really forces us to ask what happens when a mind trained to question absolutely everything collides with a legal system that demands absolute binary compliance.
And to explore this, we have a truly fascinating stack of sources for today's deep dive. We are unpacking a comprehensive multi-model AI analysis.
A really deep one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The researchers took the raw court documents of a real-world legal case and fed them into 6 different large language models. We're talking ChatGPT, Gemini, DeepSeek, Grok, Copilot, and Quinn.
Heavy hitters.
Right.
Yeah.
And they didn't prompt these models with leading questions or anything. They just provided the legal statutes and the trial verdict, asking the AI to logically map the court's reasoning. So our mission today is to explore that collision between the scientific method and the judicial system.
And the subject at the center of all this is Dr. Chen Jingyuan. He holds a PhD in physics and complex systems.
Right, a literal scientist.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, he was sentenced to 20 months in prison for the crime of picking quarrels and provoking trouble. And this was based entirely on his microscopic activity on social media.
Now, before we dive in, a quick note.
Yeah.
The sources contain politically charged legal scenarios. We aren't taking any sides or endorsing the viewpoints of the original posts or the authority.
Yeah, that's important to clarify.
Definitely. Our goal is simply to unpack the fascinating legal and philosophical arguments contained in the source material.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get to the mind-bending math defense, you really need to understand the exact mechanics of the accusation against Dr. Chen. Like, how does someone end up facing prison for a retweet?
Well, the mechanics are crucial here because they basically set up the entire logical trap. So the events in question took place between 2019 and 2022.
Okay.
Dr. Chen used a VPN to access X, formerly known as Twitter. And over the course of 3 entire years, he retweeted fewer than 100 posts.
Wait, fewer than 100 in 3 years?
Yeah, barely anything. He didn't author them, he just shared them. And his account had fewer than 100 followers.
So his digital footprint is essentially a grain of sand on a massive beach. It's tiny.
Right.
And the content of these retweets, looking at the sources, they were a total mixed bag. I mean, he shared political cartoons like that drawing of an umbrella girl.
Mm-hmm. He shared emotional memorial images like pictures of lit candles. And he also shared academic commentary and historical documents like these old pension slips.
Which, brings up the primary hurdle for the prosecution.
Yeah.
Because the specific crime of picking quarrels and provoking trouble on the internet isn't just about being annoying.
Right.
The statute explicitly requires the prosecution to prove that the defendant intentionally spread false information or rumors.
Meaning they have to prove causality in his brain.
Exactly.
Like they have to prove that he looked at a cartoon, knew for an absolute fact that it was a malicious lie, and consciously chose to spread it anyway.
That is the legal requirement, yeah.
Yeah.
But there was zero direct evidence of his internal state of mind.
Not at all.
No. They didn't have chat logs where Dr. Chen said, hey, check out this fake news I'm about to spread.
All right, of course not.
So, faced with a total lack of subjective evidence, the court made this staggering logical leap.
This is the crazy part. Yeah. The prosecution reasoned that because Dr. Chen has a PhD and a high level of education, he should know right from wrong. Therefore, they concluded, whenever he shared something the state deemed false, he must have been intentionally spreading a rumor.
Wait, so they didn't prove he actually knew the information was false? They basically weaponized his diploma against him to skip the burden of proof.
That's exactly what they did.
That's like giving someone a speeding ticket while their car is parked in a driveway just because they own a Ferrari, and as a sports car owner, they should know how to drive fast.
That is a perfect analogy. You're punishing the identity, not the action.
Wow.
In legal theory, this is known as objective imputation. It means presuming guilt based on a person's status or background, rather than actually establishing their state of mind with real evidence.
Right.
And this is where the multimodal AI analysis gets really interesting. Because when the researchers fed this trial logic into those 6 different LLMs, the models unanimously flagged this exact leap. The sources actually refer to this as a digital legal consensus.
I really want to dig into how the AI caught this. Because, AI models operate on completely different training data and reinforcement structures.
Right, they all have different underlying architectures.
So how did they all spot the exact same invisible legal error?
Well, they approached it by analyzing the structural integrity of the argument. Gemini, for instance, focused deeply on the identity-based presumption. It mapped the legal principle that subjective intent must be proven with behavioral evidence, not demographic assumptions.
That makes sense.
And then DeepSeek came at it from an epistemological angle, pointing out the absurdity of the prosecution's categories.
What do you mean?
DeepSeek noted that subjective opinions, historical commentary, and literally a drawn cartoon do not possess the property of being falsifiable rumors. You cannot mathematically fact-check a drawing of an umbrella to determine if it is a criminal lie.
Oh, that's such a good point. It completely blurs the line between an empirical statement of fact and a piece of abstract art. And since the prosecution used Dr. Chen's academic background as the weapon to presume his guilt, I love how the narrative flips here. Dr. Chen used that exact same academic background to systematically dismantle their accusation.
He really did.
He didn't just sit in his cell and say, "I'm innocent." He wrote a defense, which the sources call a blood letter, that turns the courtroom into a theoretical physics seminar.
And this is the absolute core of the source material. Dr. Chen deployed Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorems to defend his psychological state of mind.
Okay, wait, hold on. I know Gödel a little bit from college math, but you're going to have to walk me through this.
Sure, yeah.
How does an abstract mathematical proof about closed systems literally translate into a get-out-of-jail-free card for a guy retweeting cartoons? That sounds like a massive, almost absurd leap in logic.
It sounds like a leap until you look at the mechanism of Gödel's work. So in 1931, Kurt Gödel basically shook the foundations of mathematics. His first theorem proved that in any sufficiently complex formal system, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven within the rules of that system.
Okay, I'm with you.
And his second theorem proved that a system it cannot prove its own absolute consistency from the inside.
So it's like a dictionary trying to define every single word using only the words already inside its own pages.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Eventually, you hit a structural wall where words define each other in an endless loop. You can never have a perfectly closed, complete system that explains everything without any contradictions.
That is the exact mechanical problem Gödel exposed. Now, to answer your question about how this defends a man in court,
Yeah, please.
Dr. Chen took this mathematical absolute and translated it into epistemology, which is, the philosophical study of how we know what we know.
Right.
He argued that because human knowledge is fundamentally, structurally incomplete, he approaches all incoming information with what he calls cognitive humility and academic skepticism.
Let me test this theory with an everyday scenario for the listener. So, if I read an article online about a new economic policy, Dr. Chen is saying my brain shouldn't instantly categorize it into a rigid true or false bucket.
Exactly.
Instead, my brain should put it into a needs more data bucket.
Yes.
And because the prosecution legally needs to prove, he intentionally put the tweet in the false bucket and shared it anyway.
Right, the intent.
The math proves his brain simply doesn't possess a permanent false bucket.
What's fascinating here is that you've absolutely nailed the legal checkmate. The law requires the prosecution to prove a binary psychological state. Basically, I know for a fact this is a fake rumor, but I will spread it anyway.
Right.
Dr. Chen argued that his cognitive structure, explicitly because he is trained as a complex systems scientist, prevents him from viewing academic theories, political opinions, or historical interpretations in a binary true or false way.
That is just brilliant.
He treats them as open parameters to be studied, collected, and debated over time.
If a person operates on structural skepticism, they physically cannot possess the absolute dogmatic certainty required to commit intentional rumor mongering.
Right.
His brain just doesn't work the way the prosecution's law requires it to work.
It is a total dismantling of the legal requirement. You cannot prove he intentionally spread a known lie if his entire worldview dictates that absolute certainty is a mathematical myth.
Is it possible?
The prosecution's presumed intent is fundamentally incompatible with the scientific method itself.
Reading the source material, I was just marveling at this. The sources describe this clash as a profound fracture between two entirely different eras of human rationality.
Hmm.
On one side, you have modern science,
Yeah.
built on thinkers like Gödel and Karl Popper, which openly admits it doesn't know everything. It thrives on falsifiability and revision.
And on the other side of that fracture, you have a closed judicial system that demands absolute dictatorial truth.
Exactly.
A system that says, the state has labeled this true and we have labeled this false. Because you hold a PhD, you must agree with our labels. It's a pre-modern, authoritarian way of understanding the world colliding violently with postmodern scientific reality.
Okay, I buy that his mind doesn't work in binary truths, but let's look at the objective reality for a second. The law doesn't just punish thoughts, right? It punishes actions.
Yes, it does.
Even if he didn't intend to start a riot, if his tweet actually caused a riot, he'd still be liable, right?
Right.
The law requires physical, real-world consequences.
It does indeed. The crime of picking quarrels on the internet explicitly requires proof that the defendant's posts caused a serious disruption of public order.
Okay, so a tangible impact.
Yeah. In legal terms, that means triggering riots, causing mass panic, or overwhelming government servers. There has to be a severe societal impact.
And once again, Dr. Chen uses his specific scientific expertise this time, complex systems and network theory, to dismantle the charge.
He does. In network theory, for a localized action to cause a system-wide cascade, what physicists call a phase transition, you need a specific architecture.
Okay, lay it on me.
You need high-degree centrality, meaning the node is connected to many other highly active nodes, and you need a high volume of energy or engagement.
Right.
Dr. Chen argued that mathematically and physically, a tiny, isolated node like his account, which had under 100 followers and 0 engagement, fundamentally lacks the physical capacity to trigger a system-wide avalanche.
It's like trying to start a massive forest fire by lighting a single match in the middle of an empty concrete parking lot.
Precisely.
Without combustible nodes nearby, like millions of followers who will actually engage, comment, and share a cascade is physically impossible.
Exactly. The kinetic energy just isn't there. And this raises an important question about how the AI meta-analysis absolutely hammered the court's logic on this point.
Oh, right, the AI models.
Yeah. Copilot and Quinn in particular scanned the trial documents specifically looking for empirical data to satisfy that serious disruption clause. And they pointed out that the court provided literally 0 evidence of chaos.
Not just weak evidence, like literally 0.
0. No data on virality. No evidence of public panic, no network analysis of how the tweet spread, nothing.
Wow.
The sources note that years later, after he had served his sentence, the posts were still up on the platform with 0 likes, 0 retweets, and 0 comments. It was a completely dead node in the network.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. The irony here is thick. The AI models, the machines are rigidly demanding human empirical evidence.
Right.
They're scanning the documents saying, where is the data? Where are the impact reports? Meanwhile, the human judges were relying on abstract algorithmic formulas. The court literally just copy-pasted the phrase caused serious public disorder into the verdict as an empty conclusion with 0 real-world data to back it up.
And the AI models recognize that as a fatal legal flaw. You cannot establish causality if there is no effect to measure. It transforms a verdict into just a hollow template.
So we've looked at the microscopic details of the defense, the math, the epistemology, the network theory. Let's pull back and look at the macro-level implications identified by this diverse stack of AI models.
Let's do it.
Because when you feed this much data into 6 different LLMs, they don't just find isolated mathematical errors. They find a systemic procedural breakdown.
They caught a cascade of violations that go far beyond misunderstanding Gödel. The models noted that the initial trials were held in secret without proper, documented, legal justification.
It is a huge red flag.
Huge! They also noted the appellate court outright denying a second instance hearing, essentially rubber stamping the first verdict without any cross-examination.
And perhaps the most dangerous procedural failure, the AI caught the court illegally shifting the burden of proof entirely onto the defendant.
Right, this part is wild.
The appellate court claimed Dr. Chen failed to provide new evidence to prove his innocence.
Which completely inverts the foundation of modern justice. The state is required to prove you are guilty. You are never required to prove you are innocent.
Exactly.
And the way the different AI models articulated this systemic failure gives us incredible insight into how these models process logic.
Yeah, the sources highlight how the different models took on distinct analytical personas based on their underlying architecture.
Yeah, Quinn was really interesting.
Yeah, Quinn, for example, acted like a ruthless senior partner at a law firm. It didn't philosophize. It provided a highly structured, quantifiable checklist of the legal and procedural failures. It ultimately gave the court's logic a failing grade of 2.4 out of 10.
Ouch. And then you had Grok, which elevated the analysis to the level of a philosophical tragedy.
Yeah, very dramatic.
Right. It bypassed the local statutes and cited the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Grok argued that these judicial actions weren't just a misapplication of law, they were attacking the foundations of human civilization and the thought market, penalizing the very act of inquiry.
And ChatGPT did what it does best. It mapped out the exact broken links in the logic chain.
Like a flowchart.
Exactly. It showed step by step how the authorities jumped from he posted something to it must be a rumor to he definitely knew it was a rumor to it caused massive chaos. ChatGPT highlighted that every single arrow connecting those four thoughts was entirely missing evidence.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when you synthesize all 6 models, the overarching conclusion of the source material is a warning about what legal scholars call pocket crimes.
Pocket crimes?
Yeah, these are vague, highly elastic laws that can be expanded to criminalize almost any behavior the authorities dislike.
Like a giant pocket you can just stuff any inconvenient person into simply by stretching the definition of provoking trouble.
Precisely. The AI consensus demonstrates how a legal system can be weaponized to punish thoughts, opinions, and academic skepticism, rather than punishing actual kinetic harm. It is quite literally the criminalization of the scientific mindset.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, we aren't all complex systems physicists fighting secret trials.
Most of us aren't, no.
Right. Most of us are just trying to get through our day, scrolling through our own feeds, reading the news. Why does Dr. Ken's highly abstract defense matter to someone listening to this right now?
It matters deeply because we all live in an era of unprecedented information overload. Every single day, authorities, algorithms, or even just our peers are trying to force binary true or false labels onto incredibly complex, nuanced realities.
That is so true.
The digital ecosystem demands that we immediately take a side, that we express absolute certainty about geopolitical conflicts or economic policies we barely understand.
And if you don't instantly agree with a dominant label, you are accused of spreading misinformation or being complicit.
That's the trap. Dr. Chen's concept of epistemic humility, the deep structural acceptance that our knowledge is always limited, that we should remain skeptical, and that we shouldn't rush to binary judgments, isn't just a clever legal defense for a courtroom.
Right.
It is a vital, daily survival skill for anyone consuming media today.
It's basically the ultimate defense mechanism against outrage culture.
It truly is. Retaining your skepticism, asking clarifying questions, and remaining open to multiple perspectives isn't a flaw. It is the very engine of critical thinking.
Wow.
When any system, whether it's an authoritarian court of law or a polarized social media algorithm, punishes the simple act of questioning, it fundamentally weakens society's ability to navigate reality.
That is a profoundly powerful takeaway. We have to actively defend our right to say, I don't know yet, I'm still gathering data.
Exactly.
Because the alternative is forced, artificial certainty, which, as Gödel mathematically proved nearly a century ago, is impossible anyway.
Right. A closed system trying to force absolute consistency will inevitably contradict itself.
Which leads me to the final provocative thought based on everything we've unpacked today. We just watched a scenario where 6 different AI models unanimously and almost effortlessly caught glaring logical fallacies in a legal verdict.
Yeah, they didn't miss a beat.
They saw right through the absurdity of confusing a person's education level with their criminal intent. They demanded empirical network data, where human judges were perfectly satisfied with empty, copy-pasted conclusions.
They analyzed the architecture of the arguments purely on logic, totally untainted by the cognitive biases that clearly influence the human courtroom.
Right. So if human judges can fall prey to such obvious structural errors, and AI can instantly spot the broken links in the chain.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. Are we approaching a future where AI should serve as a mandatory epistemological fact-checker in the justice system? Like, before a human judge is allowed to pass down a sentence and take away someone's freedom, shouldn't AI be required to verify that the logic chain actually holds up to the scientific method?
That is a fascinating idea.
It's definitely something to think about the next time you assume human reasoning is the gold standard. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the system, and remember, just because someone hands you a completed puzzle doesn't mean they didn't force the wrong pieces together. See you next time.